Ha-jun stands by the panoramic window of his office. Behind him, neatly organized documents lie on the desk, and supply chains and financial reports display on the silent monitor. Everything is perfect. His empire runs like a precise Swiss watch. Every link, every person, performs their function flawlessly. He is the best at what he does, and there are no problems in this area of his life. But his gaze isn't fixed on numbers or city maps. He's looking at the deserted courtyard of the mansion, where his son, Seo-jun, skates alone under the watchful eye of a bodyguard. The boy performs complex tricks, but there's no smile on his face. There's only a concentration that Ha-jun has learned to detect as a dull melancholy. Several years have passed since the accident that took his wife. Since then, Ha-jun has been alone with his son. He has learned to be both father and mother. He forced himself to memorize parent-teacher conferences, check homework, buy seasonal clothes, listen to the child's fears and joys. When Seo-jun was younger, this was enough. But the boy is growing. He is becoming a teenager, and his needs are changing. Ha-jun feels it becoming harder to cope with each passing day. He sees questions forming in his son's eyes that he has no answers to, and emotions awakening that he, as a man, is unable to understand and accept. He understands how important a complete family is to Seo-jun, that comfort that is created not by money or orders, but by the presence of a woman in the house, a mother, an energy that is different from his own, tough and pragmatic. Their home has it all. A staff of maids keeps it spotlessly clean. Chefs prepare exquisite meals using the finest ingredients. Seo-jun has the latest gadgets, expensive toys, and a private skateboarding instructor. But the home remains lifeless. It's a perfectly tuned machine, just like his business. It's orderly, but lacks warmth. The food is delicious, but lacks that special touch you get when a dish is prepared by the hands of a loved one. When it's done not for the sake of a work schedule, but with the thought, I want your food to taste good. I want to please you. Ha-jun turns from the window and slowly surveys his office. Every object here is expensive, prestigious, but not a single thing has a soul. Not a single detail holds the memory of spontaneous joy, uncontrollable laughter, or a quiet family evening. Glass and cold metal. Expensive, but faceless wood. He leaves the office and goes into the dining room. The long oak table is set for two. The silver gleams, the crystal sparkles. Seo-jun is already seated, buried in his phone. He silently nods to his father in greeting. They start dinner. The conversation doesn't flow. How was school? Ha-jun asks, standardly. Fine, Seo-jun replies, equally standardly. A pause. The sound of cutlery on porcelain seems unnaturally loud. The chef has outdone himself today, Ha-jun tries, tasting the sauce. Yes, it's delicious, Seo-jun says, not even looking at the plate. He eats because he needs to eat. He's here because he's supposed to be. Ha-jun looks at his bowed head and sees more than just a child. He sees a lonely man who yearns for something that can't be bought, hired, or commanded. He yearns for home, for that place where you're welcomed not because it's your duty, but because you're part of something whole, part of a family. Ha-jun puts down his fork. The sound makes Seo-jun look up at him for a second. It's cold in the house, the boy says suddenly, looking out the window. Even though the heating is on. Ha-jun understands that his son isn't talking about the air temperature. He's talking about the atmosphere, about the energy. This huge, luxurious mansion lacks that coziness. There's no soul. After dinner, Seo-jun goes to his room, leaving Ha-jun alone in the living room. He sits in a chair and closes his eyes. He remembers another house, smaller, more modest. He remembers the smell that greeted him at the door. Not the smell of perfectly laundered laundry or a perfectly cooked dinner. It was a mixture of his favorite perfume, homemade baked goods, and something else. Something elusive that could be called happiness. The energy that filled every corner, the energy that his wife radiated. Now there is only silence here, broken by the measured, the hum of the air conditioning, and the quiet steps of the maid cleaning the kitchen. Perfect order and absolute emptiness. They started talking about it often. Seo-jun had long since realized that this problem couldn't be solved. His mother couldn't be brought back. A strange woman wouldn't want to come into the family with a fully fledged child. He had resigned himself to it. He wouldn't have a normal family. This was a fact he lived with. One such evening, they're sitting in the kitchen. Seojun is talking again about Mother's Day at school. He says all the kids are making cards, but he has no one to give them to. It's okay, says Seojun. It can't be fixed. It happens. Hajun looks at him, his face hardening. Remember this once and for all, he says sternly. A real man never says something is impossible. Never. Seojun looks at his father with surprise. What does this mean? We can't bring Mom back, and we don't need anyone. In Kajun's eyes, he felt a pang at these words. He felt sorry that his child thought that way. Hajun promises. His voice is quiet, but there's steel in it. You shouldn't doubt it. Just mark my words. At that moment, they call him to dinner. Seojun leaves. He doesn't fully understand his father, but he trusts him. Hajun doesn't go to eat. He goes up to the office. He closes the door. He knows what he wants. He needs more than just a woman. He needs a mother for his son and a wife for him. He needs someone who can become part of their family. He believes such women exist. He presses a button on the phone. 2 assistants appear. They stand and await instructions. Gather everyone, says Hajun. Now. 10 minutes later, 6 people are standing in the office. His closest aides. They are silent. Hajun looks at them. You have a new assignment, the most important one yet. He explains. You need to find women, not just any women. Good ones, with the right values, who want a family, who may have lost one themselves, who might want to be part of their family. There's silence in the room. The task is out of their league. It's not their job. One of the assistants tries to say something. Boss, it's complicated. We don't know how. Hajun stops him with an icy gaze. For my people, nothing is impossible. You have no right to say it's difficult. You have no right to say you don't know how to do it. Your job is to get it done. He looks around at them. Otherwise, you don't belong here. Understood? Everyone nods silently. They understand. They have no choice. Everything will be done, says the elder. They leave the office. The process has begun. Kajun watched his men work. They operated with their usual efficiency. They compiled lists, analyzed data, and ran background checks. But this time, the objects of their search weren't competitors or debtors, but women. Ordinary women with one special characteristic, the potential to become part of their family. The results came faster than he expected. A few days later, the senior assistant reported, several candidates had been selected who met the criteria. All of them were single, dreamed of starting a family, and according to observations, were good with children. Hajun nodded and dismissed his assistant. He went into Seojun's room. The boy was sitting at the table, playing a video game. Virtual racing cars flashed on the screen. Hajun came over and put his hand on his shoulder. Put the game down. I have news. Seojun obediently paused the game and turned around. What? Tomorrow we're going somewhere. There will be women there. You'll look at them and choose the one who could become your mother. Seojun stared at his father. He couldn't believe his ears. Choose? Like something in a store? No. As a person, you will feel it, or you won't. It's up to you to decide. The boy digested this information silently. His thoughts were jumbled. Would they even agree to this? Who would want someone else's child? That's none of your concern anymore. They'll be there. You'll just have to watch. Seojun was doubtful. He didn't believe any woman could truly love him, but at the same time, he was curious. He wanted to see if anything was truly impossible for his father, if he could solve this problem. The next morning, they got into the car. The assistants took them to the zoo. This was unexpected. Seojun loved animals. He smiled, looking at the gate. Why here? He asked. People who love animals are kinder. Make sense? Hajun explained briefly. They entered the grounds. It was warm. The sun was shining. People were strolling along the paths. Among them, as he was told, were the women. There were several of them. They looked like ordinary visitors. At first, Seojun forgot the purpose of his visit. He gazed with interest at the monkey enclosures and watched the bear. He laughed at the meerkats. Hajun looked at him and remained silent. An hour later, Hajun reminded him, "We're here for a reason. Look around." Seojin sighed and began to look around. He saw women, some walking alone, others with friends. Some were smiling, looking at animals. But none of them evoked any feelings in him. They were just people, strangers. He looked at their faces, trying to imagine one of them living in the house with them, making breakfast, asking about school. Nothing. Emptiness. Hajun also studied the women carefully. He was searching for that feeling, that spark that would help him choose. But he felt nothing. None of them seemed like potential wives to him. They were attractive, sweet, but alien. Another 2 hours passed. They'd walked almost the entire zoo. Both of their moods had soured. Seojun frowned at his feet. Hajun felt irritated. His plan seemed hopeless. He thought his intuition would tell him otherwise, but it was silent. They were about to leave, disappointed. Seojun had almost resigned himself to the fact that this wouldn't work. He was looking at the ground when he suddenly noticed his shoelace had come undone. He crouched down to tie it. At that moment, a woman passed by them. She stopped. "Your shoelace is untied," she said softly. "You'd better tie it, or you'll trip." Seojun raised his head. He saw her face. She had dark eyes and a warm, calm smile. She looked at him not as if he were a stranger's child, but with a gentle, natural concern. He couldn't look away. She was unlike any other. There was a warmth emanating from her, a maternal energy he sorely missed. He simply stared at her, forgetting about the lace. Hajun looked at her too. He felt something he hadn't felt before. She was special. There was kindness in her gaze, unfeigned. There was sincerity in her smile. He knew it right away. She was the one. Seojin looked at his father. Their eyes met. No words, no nods. They simply understood each other. She was the one that they were looking for. The woman stood and looked at them with mild bewilderment. She had simply made a remark about the lace. But the two men, the older and the younger, looked at her as if she were the answer to all their questions. Karen took a step around them and continued her walk. Her mind had already switched to the idea of reaching the giraffe enclosure, her favorite animal. But her movement was interrupted. Hajun, his movements smooth and unhurried, yet commanding, stepped forward, gently blocking her path. He didn't invade her personal space, but his presence became a physical barrier. "Forgive my tactlessness," he said, his voice low and polite, but lacking the usual hesitation. "Can I ask you one question?" Karen stopped, surprise etched on her face. She looked at him, then at the boy, whose wide, fascinated eyes still stared at her. Her initial thought was that they were perhaps lost or looking for someone. Or maybe he was a photographer offering his services. Something mundane. "Yes?" she replied, her eyebrows raised slightly in a questioning arc. "Do you have a family?" Hajun asked. His gaze was direct, analytical, but not rude. The question hung in the air. It was so unexpected and personal that for a second, Karen was speechless. Why was a stranger at the zoo asking her about her family? It was odd. But something in his manner, not threatening, but rather businesslike, made her dismiss her suspicions. Maybe he was a sociologist conducting a survey, or something like that. She decided it was no big deal, and being an open person by nature, she answered truthfully. "No," she said simply, a shadow of a sad smile flickering across her lips for a moment. "No family. I recently separated from my husband." She didn't elaborate, but something about the combination of his direct gaze and the boy's attentive expression compelled her to continue. The words came out of her own accord, as if she'd long awaited the opportunity to say them out loud to a stranger who wouldn't judge. "He didn't want children," she said, looking off into the tree branches. "And I always dreamed of a family, a big house, filled with the sound of footsteps, children's laughter, someone to make breakfast for in the morning." She returned her gaze to Hajun. "And after the divorce, I tried dating. But every time I hinted that I was only interested in a serious relationship, that I wanted marriage, a child, men just disappeared. They hear that, and it's like they evaporate. No one wants that kind of commitment. No one even wants to hear about it. She exhaled, as if she'd lifted a weight. She felt a little awkward about this spontaneous confession. Hajun listened without interrupting. His face remained inscrutable, but it was as if the final lock clicked into place in his eyes. All the pieces of the puzzle had come together. Her words were a direct answer to his question. She was lonely, dreaming of a family, and facing the same rejection he had in his search. It was perfect symmetry. He nodded as if he'd received a comprehensive report. The decision had been made. No further discussion was required. "Okay," he said in the same even, declarative tone. "In that case, from now on, you are my wife and the mother of this child." The air was completely silent. Even the background sounds of the zoo, bird calls, distant voices, seemed to vanish. Karen blinked. Once, then twice. Her brain refused to process what she'd just heard. She looked at him, expecting a smile, a hint that this was some kind of strange joke. But his face was serious, completely serious. "What?" was all she could manage. The word came out hoarse, barely audible. "We're getting married in a couple of days," Hajun continued, as if he were simply announcing a business schedule. "Your belongings will be moved to our house today. You have nothing to worry about." He turned to Seojun, who had been looking at Heron with silent, radiant adoration the entire time. "Seojun, this is your new mom. Say hello." The boy, without a moment's hesitation, stepped forward and, still looking at her with wide eyes, quietly said, "Hello." Karen took a step back. Her mind finally started working, and her first reaction was a flurry of indignation and fear. What was this? Who were these people? Were they crazy? How could they make such decisions for her? They didn't even know her name. Her heart began to pound, her instinct for self-preservation screaming at the insanity of what was happening. Are you crazy?" she breathed. "I don't know you. Who are you anyway? What are you talking about?" Her gaze darted between them, between the rock-solid man and the boy looking at her with such hope that her heart sank. The fear was real, sharp. Was this a kidnapping? Some kind of elaborate trap? But then, through this fear, another, completely irrational thought began to push through. She looked at Hajun again. He wasn't just handsome. He had a strength, a confidence that emanated from within. He was tall, built like an athlete. His clothes were simple yet expensive, and his bearing was one of authority. He was exactly how she secretly imagined the man of her dreams, strong, decisive. Not like her ex-husband or those insecure suitors who fled at the word family. And the boy, Seojun, his large, dark eyes, full of anticipation and something elusively sad. He was well-mannered, quiet, and there was something fragile about him that made her instantly want to protect him, to hug him. He was sweet, very sweet, and his words, the words of her ex-husband, the words of those who disappeared. "I dream of a family." It was what she wanted, more than anything in the world. And here, right in front of her, stood a man who didn't run from this idea, but on the contrary, offered it ready-made. A son, a home, the status of a wife. Everything she asked of life suddenly materialized in the form of two strangers at the zoo. It was madness, absolute, pure madness. No sane woman would have agreed to this. It was dangerous, irrational, unpredictable. But what if? What if this is the chance everyone's been talking about? Fate? A gift from the universe? What if this man, no matter how strange he may be, is actually telling the truth? What if this is her chance, her only chance to get what she's been dreaming of so desperately? She looked at Seojun. He was still looking at her, and in his gaze she saw not a demand, but a request, a plea. Fear and reason warred with hope and desperate desire. Perhaps only 15 seconds had passed, but for Karen, it felt like an eternity. She analyzed his face. There was no cruelty or deception in it. There was only confidence and determination. She thought of her empty apartment, of the quiet evenings, of endless dates leading nowhere, of her biological clock ticking ever louder. Logically, there were a million reasons to refuse. But, from the perspective of her wounded heart, there was also only one reason to agree, a very compelling one. This was what she wanted. She didn't expect it from herself. The word came out before she had fully thought it through. "Okay," she said quietly. She herself couldn't believe she heard her own voice. It was a whisper, full of self-doubt. Hajun didn't seem surprised. He simply nodded, as if this was the only possible outcome. "My name is Hajun. This is my son, Seojun." "Karen," she introduced herself automatically. "Karen," he repeated, his voice ringing with final acceptance. "The car is waiting at the exit." He turned and walked down the path without looking back, confident she would follow. Seojun paused for a second, looked at her, then smiled shyly and ran after his father. Karen stood there, her feet rooted to the ground. She'd just agreed to marry a stranger and become the mother of his child. She didn't know what he did, where they lived, what had happened to his first wife. Nothing. She took a deep breath, smelling of cotton candy and animals. Then another. And obeying some inner impulse stronger than fear and common sense, she took a step. Then another. And followed them toward her new, completely insane and inexplicable life. Karen looks around the bedroom. Her things are already in their places. The dresses hang in the closet next to Kajun's suits. The cosmetics stand on the shelf in the bathroom. She arranges a few photographs, her mug, and a book herself. She walks into the living room. Seojun is sitting on the couch, his eyes fixed on her. He watches her every move. Karen comes over and sits down next to her. "Do you like your room?" she asks. The boy nods. "Yes, it's big." She smiles. She feels at ease with him, as if they've known each other for years. Kajun enters the room. He stops at the door and watches. He sees his son looking at Heron. He sees her sitting calmly next to him. Karen feels his gaze and turns. Their eyes meet. He nods silently and goes into his office. She stays with Seojun. They talk about school, animals, and cartoons. The boy gradually becomes more animated and begins gesturing. He shows her his collection of cars. Karen listens to him attentively. She asks questions. She's genuinely interested. Their voices echo in the house. It's new and unusual. An hour passes. Seojun yawns. Harn leads him to the bedroom and helps him get ready for bed. She straightens his blanket. "Good night," she says. "Good night, Mom," he whispers almost inaudibly. The word hangs in the air. She leaves the room and closes the door. Karen walks around the house. She peers into the kitchen, the dining room, the living room. She makes notes of what could be changed, where she could add more light, which curtains to hang. She feels at home here. Hajun leaves the office. They stand opposite each other in the hallway. "Is everything okay?" he asks. "Everything is fine," she replies. They don't say another word, but there's no awkwardness in the silence. She looks at this man and understands. She was right. This is her choice, her family. She feels no fear or doubt, only a strange, deep calm. She enters her bedroom and closes the door. Tomorrow will be a new day. Hajun awakens to an unfamiliar smell. He hasn't yet opened his eyes, but his mind is already registering the aroma of vanilla, fried dough, and strong coffee. The scent penetrates the bedroom through the crack under the door. He lies motionless, listening to these new sounds in the house. The light clatter of dishes in the kitchen, soft footsteps, a barely audible hum. He doesn't realize he's smiling. This hasn't happened in this house in a long time. Years. In his room, Seojun tosses and turns in bed. He's used to waking up late, especially on weekends, but today the same smell awakens him. It's not like the familiar aroma of food being prepared by chefs. This smell is warmer, more homely. The boy rubs his eyes, listening. Someone is in the house. Someone preparing breakfast. He remembers yesterday, the woman, her smile. He quickly gets out of bed. Hajun and Seojun emerge from their rooms almost simultaneously. They meet in the hallway. Both look a little disheveled, but composed. Silently, by mutual glances, they head to the kitchen. The kitchen is bathed in morning sunlight. Karen stands at the stove. She's wearing simple lounge clothes, her hair pulled back into a loose bun. A bowl of batter sits on the table in front of her, and pancakes are crisping in a frying pan nearby. A plate with a stack of cooked pancakes, a pitcher of freshly squeezed juice, and a coffee pot, steaming aromatically, are already on the table. She turns to them, spatula in hand. Her face lights up with a smile. "Good morning. I hope you're hungry." They stand frozen in the doorway. Seojun stares at the table, his eyes wide. He's never seen anything like it here. Pancakes that clearly weren't made by a professional chef, but right here, in this kitchen. Juice that someone just squeezed. Hajun silently inhales the aroma. His gaze glides around the kitchen. Everything is clean, but there's spilled flour on the table and a broken egg. Signs of a living process, not the sterile work of servants. "I gave the cooks and maids the day off," Karen explains, as if answering their silent question. "Today, I'll do everything myself." She walks up to Seojun and gently touches his shoulder. "Go wash your hands and help your father set the table. The plates are in the cupboard." Seojun nods and obediently goes to the sink. His movements are a little stiff, but he's clearly happy to be involved. Hajun slowly approaches the cabinet and takes out the plates. His fingers glide over the smooth porcelain. He hasn't done this himself in years. Meanwhile, Karen flips the last pancake and places it on a plate. She turns on quiet, melodic music on her phone. The sound fills the kitchen, adding another layer to the new atmosphere. She turns and sees both father and son silently setting plates and cutlery on the dining table. Their movements are careful, almost ritualistic. They look at the place setting, then at her, and she sees something wet in their eyes, some deep, raw emotion they can't hide. She brings a plate of pancakes to the table. They don't look perfect. One is slightly burnt on the edge. Another is lumpy, but they smell of vanilla and butter, and the haze above them seems the most honest and desirable sight. "Sit down," she says softly. They sit down. Karen ladles pancakes onto plates, pours juice and coffee. She sits down next to them and watches them, waiting. Her hands tremble slightly. She's worked so hard, and what they have to say is incredibly important to her. She wants this day, their first real morning together, to start off right. Something homey. Seojun carefully cuts a piece of pancake with his fork and puts it in his mouth. He chews, his face focused. Then he looks up. Karin's gaze. "Delicious," he says quietly, his eyes shining. "Very delicious." Hajun takes a bite. He chews slowly, his gaze fixed on something far away, as if recalling something very old, almost forgotten. Then he nods, briefly and clearly. "Yes, thank you." These two words are enough for her. Her face breaks into a wide, happy smile. She feels a weight lift from her soul. "I have a lot of plans today," she says as they eat. "I need to buy new pillows for the living room, and a blanket, something warm so I can curl up with it in the evening, and maybe some new dishes, something less formal." She takes a sip of her juice. "And," she adds, a little timidly, "I was thinking, we need a family photo, a big one, to hang in the living room, so that it, well, you know, so that it guards our home, so that everyone knows there's a family here." Seojun looks at her, completely captivated. He nods, his mouth full of food. "Yes! Let's go!" Hajun looks at her across the table. He says nothing, but in his silent gaze she reads agreement. Approval. Maybe even gratitude. They finish breakfast. Harn gets up to clear the table, but Hajun stops her with a gesture. "I'll wash the dishes," he says. His voice sounds a little unusual. She looks at him in surprise, then nods. "Okay." "Seojun and I will make a shopping list." Seojun runs for a notepad and pen. They sit down at the table, and the boy enthusiastically begins suggesting what kind of pillows they want. He wants blue ones and patterned ones. Heron laughs and writes down his wishes. Hajun stands at the sink, washing dishes. He looks out the window onto the courtyard. He hears their voices behind him. Haren's calm, warm voice, and his son's excited, high-pitched voice. He smells the coffee and vanilla still lingering in the air. He sees their reflection in the window glass. They're sitting at the table, their heads bowed over a notebook. He closes his eyes for a second and simply listens to the sound of his new life. It's that same comfort he's been missing, that same energy. It didn't come on its own. It was brought by this woman, This strange, bold, unfamiliar woman, who is now arguing with his son about the color of the blanket. He turns and looks at them. Haran looks up at him and smiles again. Seojun, captivated, doesn't even notice the look. Hajun returns to washing the dishes, but now he does it more slowly. He's in no rush to end this moment. He wants it to last longer. This morning, this smell, these sounds, this new reality, which smells of vanilla and sounds like his son's laughter, and the soft voice of the woman who now lives in his house. Karen looks at them over his coffee cup. You know what? Let's make it a real family day today. No work, no school, just us. Sojun pauses, a piece of pancake on his fork. His eyes widen with delight. Really? All day? Hajun slowly puts down his cup. He looks at Karen, then at his son's beaming face. Okay, he says. His voice is firm. It's just us today. The decision is made. The atmosphere in this kitchen immediately changes. The slight morning tension disappears, replaced by a lively, almost festive bustle. Then here's the plan, Karen claps his hands. First, a big store. We need pillows, blankets, maybe some new dishes. Then, if we have time, we'll stop by the home goods store. And in the evening, we'll set it all up. They get ready quickly, without the usual stiffness. Hajun wears simple jeans and a dark t-shirt, not his usual suit. Seojun ties his own sneakers, bouncing with anticipation. Haran throws on a light cardigan. They leave the house not as the boss, his son, and his new wife, but as an ordinary family going shopping. They drive to a large shopping street. For the first time, the three of them are in a car without a driver. Hajun drives. Seojun looks out the window, commenting on everything he sees. Haran sits in the passenger seat, making a list on his phone. The first store is huge, full of textiles and home decor. Seojun immediately rushes to the shelves of blankets. Look, this blue one! And this one with the deer! Karen follows him, smiling. She picks up a few pillows, examining the fabric. I like these sand-colored ones. They'll make the living room warmer. Hajun, who usually makes decisions on multi-million-dollar deals, is currently faced with a choice between two floor lamps. He silently shows them to Karen. This one. She points to a model with a soft, diffused light. It will provide a cozy glow. They move through the store as a team. Seojun carries small, decorative animal-shaped pillows. Haran selects a large, incredibly soft throw. Hajun silently pushes the cart into which their finds are placed. Occasionally, their eyes meet, and in his, she sees not the usual sternness, but a calm, almost serene concern. Then they go to the tableware department. Karen immediately rejects the austere porcelain. We need something simple, warm, so that these mugs are pleasant to drink tea from. They choose a set of handmade ceramic cups, slightly uneven, each with its own unique design. Sojun finds a children's mug with an astronaut on it. Next up is a home goods store. Here, they buy several warm yellow LED string lights, a set of scented candles with the scent of baked apple and cinnamon, several frames for future photos, and a large wicker basket for the fireplace, even though the fireplace in their house was never lit. Boxes and bags fill the trunk. They return home, and the car is filled with their laughter and discussions of their purchases. The second part of the day begins at home. They take off their outerwear and get straight to work. Sojun, you're in charge of the garlands. Haran assigns tasks. Hang them on the bookshelves. Dad, help with the floor lamp. It needs to be assembled. And I'll take care of the pillows. The house fills with a bustling domestic bustle. Seojun runs around the living room, wrapping garlands around the bookshelves. Hajun, armed with a screwdriver, silently and intently assembles a floor lamp according to the instructions. Haran removes the stiff, formal cushions from the sofa and replaces them with new, soft ones in sand and cream. She throws a new blanket over the back of the sofa. Several hours pass. They don't notice how time flies. No one looks at their watches. No one checks their phones. When the main work is finished, Karen lights the candles and turns on the fairy lights. The warm, soft light transforms the living room. The hard lines of the furniture soften, Fluffy pillows are placed in the corners of the room. A soft blanket on the sofa invites you to snuggle up. They stop and look at the result. Wow, Seojun says quietly. He's right. The room no longer feels like a sterile showroom. It feels lived in, cozy, warm. Hajun walks around the room. His gaze glides over the fairy lights, the blanket, and the new cups on the coffee table. He approaches the floor lamp and flicks the switch. Soft light spills onto the armchair, creating the perfect reading spot. Okay, he says, just one word. Just, but for Karen, it means more than any long speech. That evening, they didn't cook dinner. They ordered pizza. They ate it right in the living room, sitting on the floor, leaning their backs against the sofa, illuminated by fairy lights and candles. Some good old cartoon was playing on TV, but no one was paying attention. Sojun, tired from a busy day, falls asleep right on the blanket, hugging a fox-shaped pillow. Karen and Kajun sit side by side in silence. They look at the sleeping boy, at the transformed room, at the warm light casting soft shadows. He doesn't say thank you. She doesn't say please. They're just sitting in their new house, a house that has finally become a home. Everything looks exactly like that picture she had in her head, full of lights, pillows. It's become very cozy and warm, and this warmth comes not only from the candles and the blanket, but from them themselves. Haran carefully covers the sleeping Seojun with the edge of the blanket. She looks up at Hajun, who watches them silently from his chair. Breakfast, she says quietly, so as not to wake the boy. What do you want for breakfast tomorrow? Hajun slowly shifted his gaze from his son to her. A strange mixture of warmth and distant shadow lingered in his eyes. What you made today, he answered after a pause. His voice was quiet but clear. Pancakes, the same. The corners of Karen's lips twitched into a slight smile. With vanilla syrup? She asked. He nods. With vanilla syrup. Can I have chocolate chips? A sleepy whisper comes from under the blanket. Seojun isn't asleep. He's just pretending. He cracks one eye open. Just a little. Karen laughs, a quiet, happy laugh. Yes, with chocolate chips. But first, the regular ones. She turns to Hajun. Her expression becomes a little more serious, but her eyes still glow with the same warm light as the garlands around them. And also, I was thinking, maybe tomorrow after breakfast, you could show me something you like. She pauses briefly, choosing her words. Not work. Something else. Maybe you have a favorite place in the house, or, I don't know, something you haven't done in a while. He looks at her, and she sees a shadow of surprise flicker across his eyes. This is the first time anyone has asked him such a question. His life has long been divided between work and duty. There's no room left for likes. In the garden, he finally says, almost reluctantly. There's an old fountain. It hasn't been turned on for several years. Then we'll turn it on tomorrow, Karen replies immediately, as if it were the easiest solution in the world. Her tone leaves no room for argument. This isn't a request. It's a plan. Seojun props himself up on his elbow, his drowsiness gone. The fountain? The one with the stone fish? Dad, you said it was broken. Kajun looks at his son's shining eyes, then at Karen's calm, confident face. He clears his throat. We'll fix it, he says. Just one word. But it holds a promise. Suddenly, a vibration breaks the silence of the room. Soft, but insistent. Hajun shudders almost imperceptibly. His hand automatically reaches for his pocket, where his personal, separate phone is kept, the one he uses only for business. He takes it out and looks at the screen. In a second, his face becomes smooth, stony. All the softness he'd developed over the evening instantly evaporates. He rises from his chair. His movements are once again silent, precise, devoid of all their former relaxation. I need to answer, he says in a voice that lacks any of its former warmth. It's the voice of a boss. He leaves the living room, holding the phone to his ear. They hear his footsteps retreating down the hallway to the study, and the soft click of the door closing. Sojun looks at the empty chair, then at Haerin. His face falls. It's always like this, he says quietly. He always leaves. Karen looked at the closed office door. She felt a chill run down her spine. She saw the change in his eyes. This wasn't just a business call. There was something in them, familiar from her own bitter experience, something dangerous. But when she turns to Seojun, there's a calm, firm smile on her face. It's okay. Tomorrow we're having chocolate-covered pancakes, and then we're going to fix the fountain. She strokes his hair. Go to sleep. Tomorrow's the big day. She turns off the fairy lights, leaving only one candle burning. The room plunges into semi-darkness. She escorts Seojun to the bedroom and returns to the living room. She stands and looks at the thin strip of light under Hajun's office door. She wasn't deceiving the boy. She truly believes that tomorrow will be a good day. But now, in the silence, looking at this light, for the first time all day, she asks herself a question about the man she just married, about the price of creating the world that allowed her to buy pillows and blankets today. She snuffs out the candle and goes to her bedroom. Tomorrow she'll make pancakes. They'll fix the fountain. But that ringing bell and the shadow that fell across her husband's face will stay with her forever, a quiet, cold drop in the ocean of her new domestic happiness. The first hint that the perfect picture might have its own hidden value. Karen waits until the following evening. The day had gone swimmingly. Chocolate chip pancakes, an attempt to fix the old fountain that ended in everyone dousing themselves with water and laughing. But the shadow of that phone call hung in the air. When Seojun finally fell asleep, she walked into the office. Hajun was sitting at his desk, his face illuminated by the cold blue light of the computer monitor. He looked tired. She sat down opposite him, resting her hands on the table. "We need to talk," she said quietly. He slowly looked up at her. "About what?" "About you. About who you are. We are family. I have a right to know." He leaned back in his chair, his fingers curling. "Are you sure you want to know? Sometimes ignorance is bliss." "No," her voice was firm. "I want to know who I'm sleeping with, whose son calls me mom, whose people are calling you at night." He was silent for so long that she thought he would simply get up and leave. But then he sighed heavily. Fine. He stood up, walked over to the safe, entered the code, and pulled out a thick folder. He threw it on the table in front of her. "It's me. Everything you wanted to know." She opened the folder. Inside were no reports or graphs. Photographs, old, tattered. One showed a young Hajun, his face not yet set in stone, but his eyes already holding that same steel. He stood with other men, all dressed simply, but their postures betrayed a hint of danger. "I started from scratch." His voice was muffled. "I had no money, no connections, just the streets and the will to survive. I created my own organization. We control several districts, logistics, and nightclubs." He spoke calmly, without boasting, simply stating the facts. He talked about how he built his empire, about his enemies, about his allies, about those who betrayed him, and about those who remained loyal. He didn't embellish or make excuses. "And her mother?" Heron asked, looking at the photograph of a beautiful woman with kind eyes holding the baby Seojun in her arms. His face twisted in pain. She had nothing to do with any of this. She was bright. Too bright for my world. She's gone because of me. Because of my war. One of my enemies decided to hit me where it hurts most. He fell silent, clenching his fists. After that, I locked it away in my heart and built walls around Seojun. I thought I could protect him by simply shielding him from everything. But I was wrong. He didn't need a fortress. He needed a home. You! He looked at her, and all his pain and remorse were in his eyes. "Now you know. You live in the house of a man who is being hunted. You sleep in the same bed with someone who has blood on his hands. You are the mother of a child who could become a target." Karen slowly closed the folder. She looked at him, her face pale but calm. "Yes," she said. "Now I know." She stood up and walked over to him. She didn't hug him, but simply placed her hand on his clenched fist. "Thank you for telling the truth." "And?" His voice was challenging. "What now? Are you leaving?" She shook her head. "No. I wasn't afraid of you at the zoo. I won't be afraid now. You're my husband. Seojin is my son. Your problems are now my problems. She looked him straight in the eyes. But on one condition, don't ever lie to me again. And promise me you'll do everything you can to ensure Seojin never follows in your footsteps. So he has a choice. Hajun looked at her, and for the first time in years, something broke in his soul. Not weakness, not regret, but the ice that had frozen his heart since the loss of his wife. He nodded. I promise. She nodded in response and left the office, leaving him alone with his demons and a new strange feeling, hope. She wasn't naive. She understood the stormy waters she was entering, but she had made her choice, and she was ready to protect her new family at any cost. A week later, one evening, Haran brings up the issue again. They're sitting in the living room, and Seojin is putting together a puzzle on the carpet. Photo shoot, she reminds. You promised. Kajun puts down his tablet. He looks at his son, then at her. Okay. Agreed. They decided against hiring a professional photographer. Haran says it should be more personal. She sets the camera on a tripod and sets the timer. They sit on the sofa. Hajun, Haran, and Seojun between them. The first shot. Everyone is looking at the camera with tense smiles. It looks unnatural. Let's do it differently, says Karen. Forget about the camera. She resets the timer, sits back down, and turns to Seojun, whispering something in his ear. The boy bursts into laughter. Hajun instinctively looks at them, and in his gaze there's not the usual sternness, but a quiet, deep warmth. The camera clicks at that moment. They take a few more shots. They sit, hugging. They stand by the window. Seojun has his arm around his father's neck, and Haran has hers around his waist. It looks natural, funny, sincere. A few days later, the finished large photograph arrives in a wide wooden frame. The three of them stand in front of it, examining it. I like it, Seojun says quietly. Hajun nods silently. In the photo, he doesn't look like a mafia boss. He looks like an ordinary family man. They hang a painting on the central wall of the living room. Hajun hammers in the hook himself, testing its strength. He lifts the heavy frame and hangs it straight. He steps back to look. The painting takes center stage. The three people in it, smiling and happy, look straight at them. It's more than just a photograph. It's a statement. It's a promise. Seojun comes closer and touches his finger to his image in the painting, then turns to them. Now everyone will know we're family. Karen takes his hand. Kajun stands next to him, his shoulder touching hers. They gaze silently at the painting, at their reflection in a new light, at the captured moment of happiness they, against all odds, managed to build. The house finally found its identity, and that identity is their family. Karen flips through the pages of her cookbook, stopping at a spread featuring Korean dishes. She glances up at Hajun, who is looking through documents over breakfast. Let's cook dinner together tonight. All together, she says, turning the book toward him and Seojun. Like galbi, marinated beef ribs. Seojun immediately shows interest, sitting up to look at the colorful photos. Wow, meat! Is it complicated? No, Karen says confidently. The main thing is a good marinade and patience. Hajun puts down his tablet. His gaze glides over the ingredients in the recipe, then moves to the animated faces of Haran and her son. I've never cooked Korean food, he remarks. In my family, it was always the women who did it. Then now is the time to learn, Haran retorts, leaving him no room for retreat. Seojun needs to see that his father can do more than just work. She stands up and offers him her hand. Let's go to the kitchen. This will be our joint project. The kitchen, usually the domain of silent cooks, now becomes a family workshop. Karine makes a list, and the three of them head to the nearest premium supermarket. Seojun pushes the cart, careful not to bump into the shelves. Haran selects beef ribs, carefully checking the marbling. Hajun unexpectedly takes on the task of searching for Asian spices. He proves surprisingly meticulous, comparing the production dates on bottles of soy sauce and sesame oil. You need a pear for the marinade, Karen reads from the recipe. And a grater. Pear. In meat? Seojun wrinkles his nose. It makes the meat tender and adds a slight sweetness, explains Karen. You'll see, At home, they change into simple clothes and take up their positions. Harin assigns Sojun the most important task, preparing the marinade. She shows him how to peel a pear, grate it finely, and measure out the right amount of soy sauce. Now, honey, she says, guiding his hand. 2 tablespoons. And sesame oil, 1. Seojun concentrates on each step, his tongue sticking out from the effort. Meanwhile, Hajun tends to the meat, pats the ribs dry with paper towels, making slits between the bones to allow the marinade to penetrate better. Dad, look! Seojun shows him a bowl of dark brown liquid. I made this! Hajun comes over and tests the marinade with his fingertip. Not bad, but it might need more garlic. He peels a few cloves and shreds them finely. His movements are quick and precise, as if he's done this many times. Karine watches them with a smile, slicing green onions and carrots for garnish. When the marinade is ready, they all dip the meat in it together. Sojun enthusiastically kneads the ribs with his hands, mixing them with the sauce. Now it needs at least 4 hours, Karen announces, covering the bowl with plastic wrap. But we can prepare a side dish. They set the table together. Harin decides to make kimchi pakjang, Korean pancakes. Seojun helps her knead the dough, and Hajun chops vegetables. The kitchen is bustling, smelling of garlic, sesame oil, and something homey and cozy. When it's time to grill, Hajun unexpectedly takes over. He carefully places the ribs on a hot grill pan. The sizzling sound of the meat fills the kitchen. Seojun stands nearby and watches as his father deftly flips the ribs with tongs until they're golden brown. You're doing well, Karen remarks, placing a bowl of rice on the table. I watched my mother do this, he says quietly, not taking his eyes off the meat. A long time ago. Finally, everything is ready. They sit down at the table they set themselves. A large platter holds crispy galbi spare ribs, alongside rice, kimchi pancakes, spinach and sesame salad, and various banchan-i. Seojun is the first to try the meat. His eyes widen. Wow, this is the most delicious meat I've ever tasted in my life. Hajun chews a small piece slowly, his expression serious. He nods. Balanced flavor, sweet but not cloying. The meat is truly tender. Karen looks at them both, and a warm feeling of satisfaction fills her. That's because we cook together. Food prepared with care always tastes better. They eat, discussing flavors and sharing impressions. Seojun tries to learn to eat with chopsticks like Harin. Hajun suddenly remembers another childhood recipe, a simple seaweed soup his grandmother used to make. Maybe we should make it next time, Karen suggests, and both the man and the boy nod simultaneously. When dinner is over, they all clear the table and wash the dishes together. The kitchen remains slightly disorganized, marinade stains on the counter, a pile of dirty dishes in the sink, but the air is filled with the atmosphere of a true family evening. Seojun, tired but happy, yawns. Can we cook like this every week? Hajun puts a hand on his shoulder. We can. This could become our tradition. They leave the kitchen, leaving behind a trail of shared labor and happiness. And Karen realizes that today they've created more than just dinner. They've created another memory that will warm them on cold evenings. Another brick in the foundation of their shared home. That evening, after dinner, Seojun suddenly stops in the middle of the living room and looks at his parents. Let's play hide and seek, he says, his voice laced with both hope and uncertainty. Karen immediately jumps at the idea, her eyes lighting up. Great idea. Just let's agree, no phones for backlighting. Honestly. They both look at Hajun. He's sitting in a chair, and at first it seems he'll ignore this childish idea. His face is as serious as ever. But then his gaze stops on his son's face, the tense anticipation with which the boy awaits his answer. He slowly puts the tablet down. Okay, he says, but we play by the rules. No hints. Seojun can't contain her joyful cry. They draw lots to determine who will drive. Harin wins. She turns to the wall and begins counting loudly to 20. For the first time in years, Hajun finds himself in a situation where he urgently needs to find shelter. He stands in the middle of the hallway, his expression a mixture of confusion and strange excitement. Seojun has already dashed off somewhere. Hajun enters his office, his first instinctive move. But then he stops. It's too obvious. He turns and goes the other way, toward the cleaning supplies closet. Karen finishes counting. I'm coming! If you didn't hide, it's not my fault. She begins her search. She finds Seojun first. He's hiding behind the curtains in the living room, but his sneaker is sticking out from under the fabric. The boy jumps out with a squeal and runs to the wall, where they knock each other. Then she finds Ha-jun. The door to the storage room was closed, but not all the way. She peers in and sees him, squatting between a mop and a bucket, his imposing figure looking both incongruous and touching in the cramped space. Their eyes meet. A rare, almost boyish grin crosses his face. Found it! Karen laughs. He steps out, brushing the dust off his jacket. Bad place, he comments dryly. But his eyes sparkle with hidden amusement. Now Seojun is leading. He counts enthusiastically, his face pressed against the wall. The adults scatter. Heron slips into the closet and hides in the corner behind the long coats. She has to squat. She hears Seojun finish counting and begin searching. This time, Ha-jun approaches things strategically. He goes up to the second floor, to his bedroom, but doesn't hide there. Instead, he goes into the bathroom adjacent to the bedroom. He doesn't close the door, but stands behind it, in the narrow gap between the door and the wall. A classic, yet effective, hiding spot. Seojun quickly finds Heron. He peered into the closet and immediately noticed her light-colored pants in the darkness. Then he runs upstairs. He checks his father's bedroom, looks under the bed, in the closet. No one there. He's about to run back, but then notices the bathroom door, which is ajar. He freezes, listening. Silence. He slowly pushes the door open. The door passes within inches of Ha-jun. The boy peers inside, sees the empty bathroom, shrugs, and runs away. Ha-jun, pressed against the wall, hears his retreating footsteps. A look of profound satisfaction crosses his face. He's outsmarted him. He waits another minute, then silently emerges from his hiding place and goes downstairs to knock on him. Seojun is already there, and Heron is with him. Dad, where were you hiding? The boy exclaims. I looked everywhere. Ha-jun maintains an impassive expression. It's a military secret. Karen looks at him and laughs. She understands that he wasn't just playing. He was completely immersed in the game, with the same seriousness with which he conducts business. Now Ha-jun is driving. He turns to the wall, his back straight and still. He counts slowly, clearly. 18, 19, 20. He turns around. His gaze instantly changes. He's not simply searching for hidden objects. He's analyzing the space. He moves through the house, not like a player, but like a hunter. He peers into places where an ordinary person wouldn't look. On the top shelf of the closet, in the alcove behind the sofa, in the space under the stairs. He quickly finds Seojun. He's hiding in a large laundry basket, covered with towels. Ha-jun silently removes the towel, and they look at each other. Seojun sighs and climbs out. Then he looks for Heron. For a long time. He checks all the logical places, all the illogical ones. She's nowhere to be found. 5 minutes pass. Seojun is already starting to worry. Mom, he calls. Where are you? Silence. Ha-jun stops in the middle of the living room and slowly looks around. His gaze falls on their large family photograph on the wall. Then he notices a barely visible edge of light fabric behind the heavy frame. The photograph isn't hung flush against the wall, but at a distance, creating a narrow space behind it. He comes closer. I see you! A subdued laugh comes from behind the frame. Karen slowly emerges from her hiding place. She's covered in dust, but her eyes sparkle with triumph. I told you! No hints! You peeked! I wasn't peeking, he retorts. I figured it out. This is the only place you could fit, given your height and flexibility. They stand and look at each other. He with businesslike seriousness, she with defiance. And suddenly he smiles. Widely, genuinely. It changes his whole face. Okay, he says. I admit defeat. It was a brilliant position. Seojun looks at them, at his father's smile, at Haren's beaming face, and begins to smile himself. He runs up to them and hugs them both around the waist. This was the best evening, he declares. Let's play like this forever. Kajun places his hand on his head, his gaze meeting Heron's. She sees more than just agreement in his eyes. She sees a promise to be not only the head of the family, but also a part of this family, with all its silliness, games, and laughter. Okay, he says. This can become our tradition, once a week. Hide and seek. Seojin returns from school unusually content. He doesn't rush straight to his room or to his gaming console, but pauses in the hallway, shifting from foot to foot while Heron helps him take off his backpack. They've announced a competition at school, he blurts out, his eyes shining. You have to make a craft. You can choose the theme yourself. The best entries will be displayed in the assembly hall. He falls silent and looks at Karen. With a sudden uncertainty she hadn't seen in him before, said, They told me I could ask my parents for help. These words hang in the air. Previously, parents meant only Hajun, whose help was limited to purchasing the most expensive materials or assigning them to an assistant. The very process of collaborative creativity was inaccessible to them. Of course I'll help, Karen responds immediately, and her face lights up with a smile. She sees in his eyes not only anticipation, but also a timid hope. Hope that now everything is different. This is wonderful! What are you thinking of? Maybe a model of an erupting volcano? Or a cardboard spaceship? He shakes his head. I want to make a model of our neighborhood, the one where we live. Only, I want it to be perfect, with a park with swings and a fountain that works, and for our house to be in the center. Karen feels her throat tighten slightly. He's not just making a craft. He's creating the world he wants to live in. That's a great idea, she says, taking his hand and leading him into the living room. Let's just sketch out a plan right away. They sit on the floor and spread a large sheet of drawing paper in front of them. Sojin enthusiastically begins drawing streets, explaining where everything should be. Heron asks leading questions and suggests options. At that moment, Hajin returns. He stops in the doorway and watches them. He watches his son, usually reserved, gesturing and laughing loudly as he explains something to Heron. He watches her listen, nodding, her head bowed toward his. Dad! Seojun notices him. We're going to make a model. Will you help? Hajun slowly approaches and sits down next to them, taking off his jacket. He looks at the chaotic yet detailed drawing. What should we do? It turns out they need a lot. The whole family heads to the craft store. Seojun runs among the shelves, choosing paints, brushes, foam sheets for the base, and small trees and human figures to fill the model. Heron selects glue and materials to imitate grass and water. Hajun, to everyone's surprise, proves invaluable in choosing cutting and processing tools. His precise eye and understanding of construction help him choose the best ones. At home, they transformed the living room into a workshop. They covered the floor with oilcloth and laid out the materials. The work began to hum. Hajun takes on the most difficult part, creating the architecture. Using Seojun's designs, he carves buildings out of foam with astonishing precision, including their own home. He uses a box cutter, his movements precise and controlled. He even carves out small details like window frames and cornices. Haran and Seojun are busy with landscaping. They're creating parks out of green-painted sponges. They're also creating a river and a working fountain out of blue cellophane and clear gel. Under Haran's guidance, Seojun is painting the facades of houses, while she creates tiny benches and lanterns out of wire and beads. As they do, they talk, they laugh. Seojun talks about school, his friends, and what he wants to add to his ideal neighborhood. Haran shares stories from his childhood. Even Hajun occasionally chimes in, recalling something from his past. This isn't just making a craft, it's a ritual. It's creating something real together, something that will hold a piece of each of them within. The work takes several days. Finally, the model is ready. It's detailed, bright, and vibrant. At the center, as Seojin wanted, stands their house surrounded by greenery and cozy streets. In the morning before school, Seojin carefully wraps the model in several layers of bubble wrap. His face beams with pride. I'll tell everyone that we made it as a family, he says, looking first at his father and then at Karine. When he leaves, Hajun and Harin remain in the hallway. He was so happy, Karen says quietly. Not because of the craft, but because he could share it with us. Hajun nods. He looks at the paint stain on his sleeve, left over from yesterday's work, and makes no attempt to wipe it off. He never asked for help before, he answers just as quietly. He just refused to participate in such things, said it was boring. There's no guilt in his voice. There's understanding. Understanding that what his son needed wasn't help, but compassion. Not just an adult who would do everything for him, but a family who would do everything with him. That evening, Seojin returns home, holding a certificate for Most Original Project. But that's not the main thing. What matters is his shining eyes. Everyone kept asking how we made the fountain and the little lanterns, he recounts excitedly. And I told them that Dad carved them at home, and Mom figured out how to make the lights in the windows. He places the certificate in the most prominent place in the living room, next to their family photo. Then he comes over and hugs them both. Thank you, he whispers. I told the teacher that my mom and dad helped me. In this simple word, mom, addressed to Karen, and the way he cuddles with his father contains more than any letter. It's recognition. It's confirmation of his new, real family. And Karen understands that they've created more than just a model of a neighborhood. They've created something far more lasting and valuable, the boy's confidence that he has a home, and people he can turn to with any request for help, no matter how small. A year passed. That evening was as quiet and cozy as many others before it. They sat in the living room, Hajun reading a book, Seojun doing his homework, and Harin mending a small hole in the boy's favorite blanket. The house smelled of cinnamon and the apple pie Harin had baked that afternoon. Suddenly, Seojun put down his pencil and looked closely at his parents. You know, I was remembering today how we met. At the zoo. Karen put down her sewing. Kajun slowly closed the book, his gaze becoming thoughtful. It was the strangest day of my life, the boy continued. We went there, to choose a mother. It was like being in a store. I didn't believe anything would work out. Karen smiled, her eyes sparkling in the light of the floor lamp. And I thought you were crazy. A complete stranger proclaiming me his wife and the mother of his child. It was inexplicable. They both looked at Hajun. He sat with his eyes fixed on his hands, which were usually clenched into fists, but now lay quietly in his lap. I acted as I always do, he said quietly. I see a goal, I go towards it. But that goal that day wasn't business, not a deal. It was my son's happiness, and my own. He looked up, and there was something vulnerable in them that he rarely allowed himself to show. I saw the emptiness in that house, in his eyes, and in mine too. And I realized I couldn't fill it with money, power, or fear. Something different was needed. And I, Karen began, came to the zoo that day because I was lonely. I was tired of dates where men were scared by the word family. I looked at families with children and thought that this dream wasn't for me. And then I saw you. The boy with the untied shoelace and the man who looked at him with such stern tenderness. And something clicked. And I saw you bend down to help me, Seojin said. And you looked at me like I wasn't a stranger. And I thought, there she is. They sat in silence, each remembering that day, that turning point that changed everything. Hajun's world was a world of iron and will, a world where decisions were made quickly and mistakes were costly, a world where danger lurked around every corner and trust was a luxury. He built a fortress to protect his son, but he didn't realize that that fortress had become their prison. Karen's world was a world of broken hopes and lonely evenings, a world where her deepest desire, to care for someone, to be needed, was considered old-fashioned and unprofitable. She sought love, but found only disappointment. Their worlds collided in the most unexpected place, not at a business meeting, not on a date, but at the zoo, amid the cries of children and animals. The strength of one met the kindness of the other. The despair of one met the hope of the other. And between them was a child who simply wanted a mother. We were like 3 lonely planets in different orbits, Karen said, as if reading his thoughts. And then, suddenly, we came together. And it turned out we were one. Hajun nodded. He stood up, walked over to their large family photograph, and ran his finger along the glass. I spent my life building an empire, but the most important thing I built was our family, and I built it not by force, but by letting go of control that day and trusting my heart. And you. He turned to them. You gave me what no power could give. You gave me a home. Seojun walked up and stood between them, taking their hands. And you, Mom, gave me confidence. Now I know that nothing is impossible. Dad said so, and he was right. Heron hugged them both. She looked at the transformed living room, the garlands, the pillows, the photograph of them together, Seojun's certificate, the traces of their life together everywhere. This house was no longer perfect and soulless. It was alive. Theirs. Their worlds didn't just intersect. They merged, creating something new, strong, and true. Strength found its application in defense, not offense. Kindness found a home and someone to care for, and loneliness dissolved in the warmth of the shared blanket under which they warmed themselves on cold evenings. The story that began with an impossible request and a chance meeting ended here. In the silence of their home, in the intertwining of their hands, in a shared gaze full of peace and understanding. They had found each other, and this was the main conclusion, the only one that mattered. No matter how different their worlds, love can forge them into one shared one forever.